Hi, everybody. I'm Lynn Harper. Welcome to Opposing Viewpoints, live radio for TV. We have a provocative half hour in store for you, and I want to make the most of it, so we'll jump right in. Here's the question. Sounds so easy. It's only 3 words. Is cloning ethical? But there's so much we can say, and we'll try and make the most of this time. Let me introduce my guests who are going to help us with this very, very difficult issue. On the, I won't say which side of cloning you're on, but it's Dr. Larry Goldstein. I know, but I won't say. Let's see if anybody can figure out from what you have to say. I do want to give you Dr. Goldstein's credentials, however, so you know where he's coming from. Dr. Larry Goldstein, PhD, Professor of Cellular and Molecular Medicine, UCSD, Investigator, Howard Hughes Medical Institute, and I am not done. Larry has been re-elected Secretary of the American Society for Cell Biology, a major voice for basic biomedical research in the United States. Welcome, Larry. I'm impressed.
Thank you.
Okay.
Nice to be here.
Thank you very much. And now, my other guest, Bruno Leoni, Professor of European Intellectual History, SDSU. Bruno is an author and lecturer on cloning and creationism versus evolution. Whoa! Welcome, Bruno. You're in the right place tonight.
Thank you.
All right.
Good to be here.
Wow, I'm sitting between 2 people who are going to give me an education and everyone else as well, I'm hoping. All right, the question on the board, is cloning ethical? And what I'd like to do is begin the discussion with Dr. Larry Goldstein. May I call you just Larry?
That would be great.
I would appreciate that. Okay, here's the question. Will cloning technology and ongoing research benefit human conditions and disease? Seems so simple, doesn't it?
It is simple.
Answer my question.
Yes, of course it will.
Okay.
And
Because?
cloning technology, as opposed to cloning per se, will lead to the development of methods that can be useful to treat diseases for which we have no cures now. Lou Gehrig's disease, certain kinds of diabetes, probably Parkinson's disease, and you know, you pose it as such a simple question, is cloning ethical? I'm going to turn it around on you.
That's fair.
To say, what kind of cloning are we talking about? Cloning is simply a technological term that means to make copies of something. So do you mean DNA cloning, cell cloning, animal cloning, organismal cloning, cloning of adult humans, cloning of stem cells? All of those are different kinds of cloning. And to reduce the question to such a simple notion actually obscures what is in fact a debate about the uses of a number of different kinds of technologies and which ones should be developed, which ones should be encouraged, and which ones should be prohibited in our society.
Before I move on to Bruno Leoni, this is my question to you, because I thought I would let you lay out all the various types of cloning. Obviously, you're more qualified than I am. Is there any type of cloning, Larry, whatsoever that you would feel would be unethical?
Yeah.
And what would that be?
That would be cloning to attempt to generate human babies or adult humans who are genetic copies of existing or deceased people.
Excellent. Everything else would be, to some extent, beneficial.
Yes,
That's what I wanted to go,
yeah.
because Bruno Leoni, I would like to have your impression of this. We're not going to talk about human cloning, because most everyone agrees that that's a little tough, unless you disagree with that.
I don't know if you can
assume.
separate human cloning from the other kinds of cloning
Please.
he's talking about. Larry's absolutely correct. Cloning comes in many different shapes and forms. Genetic cloning on the genetic level, which I believe they've used to develop hormonal therapy, insulin, things of that sort, right up to human cloning. You could really reduce it to 2 categories, therapeutic cloning and human cloning. Therapeutic cloning, cloning for therapeutic purposes, to help lives, extend lives, save lives. Reproductive cloning, as he pointed out, is just the reproduction of another human being. Create another human being. Either figure out a way of scraping off the DNA from the bones of Isaac Newton and recreate a man who died 500 years ago, to this problem with Ted Williams. Simple way around it is just simply save some of his DNA and clone him. I am not sure if you can separate the two. I don't know of too many people who are for reproductive cloning, but there are a lot who support therapeutic cloning. I don't think the two can be separated. Once it's introduced into the scientific arena, there is no way they're going to stop people from reproducing human beings. So it's not something, it cannot be kept out of the argument.
Well, then let's discuss why a number of people object to any kind of cloning or some kinds of cloning, and talk about that. Because there are so many people who object, and once again, from a political standpoint, especially from a religious standpoint, as you must know. So let's talk about the objections.
Objecting to
Therapeutic cloning, my goodness, it's going to help everyone. Why would they object?
I think here probably the slippery slope argument comes in. You open the door, and once the door is open, you let the genie out, and once the genie is out, how do you stop it? How do you contain it? Can you get it back into the bottle? I don't think so.
Fair enough. And do you want to? That's the point. Do you want to?
Oh, yeah.
How can anyone argue, you would say, against therapeutic cloning if no one is hurt in the process? You must have heard the arguments against it.
Yeah.
So let's deal with some of those.
So I think there are two categories of argument. There's the argument that Bruno just laid out, which says that if we get to the point where we can make a blastocyst in a petri dish in the laboratory that is the result of cloning technology, where the cells are genetically identical to an existing person, if we have that, then we will be unable to resist the temptation to implant that into the uterus of a woman. That's what that argument is. And I think that you can have a law against implanting it into the uterus of a woman.
Now look what you've done. You've opened the people in the government to step in, further interfere in one's life. That's going to be the argument against that.
Well, no, actually, there's a good medical ethics argument to make against it. It's actually not a safe procedure.
Right.
It's likely to lead to abnormal or dangerous pregnancies or what have you. I mean, we can return to that argument in a moment. So that's one class of argument. It's the slippery slope argument. It's the argument that says, because we don't like murder, we'll outlaw guns. The other argument is a religious argument. It says that a blastocyst, that is a ball of 200 cells in a petri dish, is the same in its moral, ethical, and legal value as one of us in this room. It's a notion sometimes thought of as zygotic personhood. And it says that
I've heard it before.
That's right. And it's something that has no precedent in American law or culture. It is a religious point of view, and not all religions share it. So to say that it's just religion that tells us not to do this is not true. Some religions say it's perfectly fine to do that.
But some don't.
That's right.
Because
some
they
do,
feel
some
it's
don't.
a human. Now, you're a
That's
doctor,
right. And we're a pluralistic society, and
Sure.
we don't just go with one religion's view in crafting our laws.
well, let's look at the scientific viewpoint. Do you
Right.
feel that's a human being?
No, I
Blastocyst?
don't. No, I don't.
All right. And what would give them the argument that it would be?
So the argument is one, obviously, I don't completely understand it because and I don't buy its logic. So the argument goes like this. During normal human development, a sperm cell and an egg cell fuse and go through several days of growth and development to make this thing called a blastocyst, which is a ball of 200 cells without a heart, a brain, no nervous system, no blood. That eventually, if put in a woman's uterus, can and often does lead to an adult human, and that's the basis of IVF technology, in vitro fertilization to treat infertility. Now, we can also, we think, although this has not yet been done in humans, but it's been done in animals, take the egg cell from a woman, remove its genetic material, so that all we have is a little membrane enclosing some special molecules that control genes. And we can then potentially take one of your skin cells, put it in that egg cell, and then activate it. And it'll go through several days of growth and development, and we'll make something that morphologically looks a lot like a blastocyst. And in animals, at a very low frequency, can, on occasion, give rise to an adult animal.
Is that what happened with Dolly the sheep?
That is Dolly the sheep. But it takes an act. You have to take that blastocyst and put it into a female animal or a human in order to get it to become a person in that way. Now, the religious argument says that since it looks like a blastocyst, since we can sometimes get it to make an animal in animal species when we implant it, therefore it is equivalent to one of us if it has been generated with human DNA. Now, what that point of view doesn't take account of is that we have always defined an embryo as being the result of the fusion of sperm and egg. That is what the Bible talks about, effectively. That is normal human reproduction. And I would argue that the Bible is silent on the question of whether taking a nucleus of a skin cell and putting it into an egg cell gives rise to a person or not.
Okay, and Bruno Leone, I have a question for you from what you heard Larry say. I guess, are you at all concerned with any religious ramifications of any of this cloning at any time, and if so, what?
No, I'm not. In fact, I tend to agree with him. Something at the blastocyst stage, I don't see where it could be credibly argued, other than from a religious point of view, that you are dealing with a life or a potential life in the Aristotelian sense, yes, but an actual life, something with a soul, no. I still have a problem with the idea of therapeutic cloning. Again, I see it as problematic on two levels. on one level, what is the purpose of it other than to extend life? Now, on the one hand, that sounds fine. When Alexander Fleming came up with penicillin, he probably did more than any other science in the history of man to extend life, to help eliminate premature death. What they'll be doing with therapeutic cloning is harvesting, in a sense, organs and things of that sort. And you've got to make a distinction between life expectancy and lifespan. We have an expectancy of 78, 79 years, but we have a lifespan of 120. It means if cancer doesn't get you, if heart disease doesn't get you, if you don't sever your spinal cord and experience a premature death, you're going to live to about 120, and then eventually you'll die. I could see the possibility, and I've heard this and read this by scientists, of moving our life beyond the 120 years, simply by doing that. Preventing the skin from aging with Botox, preventing brain tissue from deteriorating with rarefied DNA injections. Now there's where, number one, I see a problem. Here's where I think we are tampering with nature. You notice I didn't say God, but you're tampering with nature. Okay. You're moving beyond that deck of cards that that God has dealt us, or that nature has dealt us. I see a problem there. The last 200 years, the population of the Earth has increased by a multiple of 6.6 times. At that current rate, by the next millennium, there'll be 75 trillion people living, and that presumes the current life expectancy. If we move things up to 120 and then go beyond that point, the consequences could really simply be dire.
Well, we've gone beyond the point of our first break, but let me just say, if that happens, we'll be living in Soylent Green world. Believe me, Bruno.
That's
scary, scary, scary. But let's take a quick break, and when we get back, we will pick up where we left off. I want to remind you, you're listening to Opposing Viewpoints, live radio for TV, with my guest, of course, Dr. Larry Goldstein. I can call Larry. Bruno Leone, I refer to as Bruno. Thank you very much, both of you. We will be right back. I'm Lynn Harper. We were talking about cloning. We decided we're going to put aside the issues of religion, because it takes just too long to even argue that, if you would even care to. But your question was, where do you cross over the line? You brought up the issue of penicillin, and if we're going to interfere in man's longevity vis-a-vis his health, then the man who developed penicillin should not have done that, because he's letting someone live longer. Gee whiz, here we come to cloning, and then of course we had to take a break. So if you want to pick up from there and let Larry have a shot at you.
Okay, well, first of all, no, I didn't quite say that. There was nothing wrong by my paradigm with what Dr. Alexander Fleming did. Because if you make the distinction between life expectancy and lifespan, penicillin will not in no way will not carry us beyond that 120 years. Once they find a cure for every disease imaginable, we will live 120 years and then we will die.
But there'll be new diseases being developed, as you know.
With cloning, including therapeutic cloning, they can bring us beyond that point. At that point, in a sense, I feel that we are tampering with nature. I don't mean it in a religious sense, but rather in an evolutionary sense. I'm a Darwinian evolutionist. The laws of nature, the survival of the fittest, the very thing that is put in place by nature to keep this world a fine-tuned machine is being tampered with. And that's the thing that really concerns me.
Before I move to you, Larry, I just want to say that if you bring the human equation into it, right, as I was telling Bruno during the break, it's well and good to look at the macro side, but bring it down to micro. When it's your child, your loved one, you'd almost do anything to make sure that they're safe.
So I have a simpler argument that I want to make before I come back to Bruno's point, which is a little bit different. And that is, suppose that you, Lynn, were diagnosed today with Lou Gehrig's disease. There are some forms that will be fatal within a year. And suppose that we knew how to take one of your skin cells and one of your egg cells and combine them to make a cell line that would treat your disease and save your life. Is that something that our society wants to forbid? Your cells, your property, your everything, right?
I can't imagine anybody disagreeing with that. What about you?
No, I don't disagree with that. And if it were my child, I'm sure I'd agree with Larry.
What about me, Bruno?
And especially, I've become fond of you in the last 20 minutes.
I appreciate it. Thank you very much.
But what my concern is, at what point does it stop? You see, unfettered scientific advance has a way of turning upon itself, and I think turning upon humanity. The atomic bomb is a good case in point. When Albert Einstein figured out that E equals mc squared, that there's energy contained in the atom, that if you open an atom, you're going to release energy. I don't think he ever considered the possibility that someone would have figured out, suppose we release billions of atoms, split them open at one time, then we'll release a lot of energy. I mean, there are problems attendant to any scientific advance. With cloning, I see the problems as being legion. And to avoid it in order to save a life, that's problematic. If I could answer that question, I wouldn't be here. I'd be on Mount Sinai, a burning bush.
Yes.
That's it.
I have to agree. I'd be right there with you. And your second point?
Well, so Bruno raised the question of human nature, which I think is a good one. You know, to what extent does medical technology change our human limits in ways that we would find objectionable or that shouldn't be done? And I think, again, there are a couple issues to consider. One is that all of modern medicine has already done that. I'd actually argue that Darwinian evolution basically selected for our viability until we gave rise to children and until we raised them. And after that point, we were more or less disposable anyway, so that your natural life expectancy, you know, historically would have been on the order of 30 or 40 years. And so,
as it used to be.
Yeah, as it used to be. So modern medicine has extended that. So I think we've already crossed that point. I think the other issue is what is and is not feasible, and what will our descendants choose to do or not to do. And I don't know that we can make that decision now for all time. I think I'd argue that the question is always, what uses will we put technology to? Will we be wise enough to not use them for our destruction? And will we be wise enough to use them for reasonable benefit? And I realize that's not a simple question.
No, but we've answered it already, haven't we?
Atomic energy is an interesting question. So yes, nuclear weapons are terrible. I actually happen to believe that fusion power, fission power in the long run are going to be beneficial. It'll get us away from coal and oil and a lot of things that I think are not good for our society. You know, I don't know if I'm right, but that would be my personal point of view.
Your question of will we be wise enough right there gives you the red flag. We aren't wise enough as a race, as a group, as bipeds, we mankind. We really aren't. We do good and we do bad equally.
Yeah, I think that's right.
I want to know what outweighs one or the other.
I guess I'm not going to condemn the human race and say that, you know, we are always doomed to make the wrong choice. I'd like to believe that there's hope, and I am a bit of a compulsive optimist. And I think that if we just give in and say, well, we can never figure out how to do the right thing, is defeatist.
Okay, what do you think about that?
I think the nature of science is such that I'm reminded of an old Greek fable, the one of the frog and the scorpion. I don't know if you've ever heard of it.
Tell it.
Okay, a frog and a scorpion were on a bank and facing a river, and the scorpion asked the frog if he would give him a lift across the river. The frog looked at the scorpion and said, "No, why should I? You know, you'll bite me and I'll drown." The scorpion said, "But if I bite you, I'll drown with you." So the frog said, "That makes sense. Hop on my back." Halfway across the river, the scorpion bit the frog. As they were both going down, the frog said to the scorpion, "Why did you do that? Now you're going to die with me." The scorpion shrugged and said, "It's my nature." Now what I see here is it's the nature of science to do what it does. The scientists in the laboratory really, and he shouldn't, think of the long-term consequences. We are the frogs in many cases, you know, the unwitting, unwary, and naive frogs who go along with it simply because the scientific community says, let's do this. And that's basically what I see cloning, in a sense, as perhaps having more horrific consequences than perhaps atomic energy.
Wow, you know, I'm thinking from what I've heard, on the surface, it seems like such a wonderful thing. Mm-hmm. Not the human cloning, I'm saying we can save lives and extend lives and stop disease or stop before it even starts, et cetera, et cetera.
Right.
And then I'm thinking of the frog and the scorpion. And we're the frogs, and I'm thinking to myself, mankind really doesn't do everything right all the time.
Let's be blunt here.
Okay.
I don't like being the scorpion in this little story, and I think that and I think that really mischaracterizes scientists. We do think about the long-term impact of what we do. That's why I'm sitting here.
Individually, you do, Larry. You personally.
As a community, we do.
The
American Society for Cell Biology and
look what
lots of scientific societies do.
I'm not blaming the scientists. I'm saying that people who are possibly not scientists.
Good, then you're not going to call me the scorpion either.
No. They take your work and they do mischief with it in many cases. I'm not blaming. Did I blame the scientists? Did you hear me say that?
No,
of course
not.
Well, yeah, well, so I'm right in the middle of you. That's all I need.
Let me put it a different way.
Okay.
I would argue
second chance.
That what scientists do is we discover things. We find out how the world works. We develop methods to intervene. It is up to society, you people, to decide how you will use what we discover.
And there's the problem. Thank you very much.
Yep.
It's up to society itself, not just the scientists, but society.
I never said it was just up to
And you've got to
scientists.
trust society to do the right thing. Do you trust society to do the right thing?
I don't think you can. I think we would argue that we used the atomic bomb in '45, but we were the good guys. We were lucky.
Yes.
Suppose the bad guys had got hold of it.
Boy.
Suppose the bad guys get hold of cloning, the technology of cloning.
They
During the
don't.
Iranian-Iraqi war, the Iranians were sending 12, 14-year-olds out. Suppose they clone 2 million people somewhere in the desert, support them, and then turn them loose on the Iraqis or one of their neighbors sometime in the future. Now, if you say that's improbable, if history has taught us anything in the last 20 years, is that anything is possible.
But then again, I understand the questing nature of the scientist. You can't help, you all can't help but move forward because that's what you do. It's like a great violinist, an artist.
Well,
You have to do it.
Well, it's partly based on science, and it's partly based on the desire to heal. As a medical
Sure.
scientist, we try to cure disease. We try to find out how biology works so that we can treat disease. And I find the Iranian argument a little bit improbable. I mean, I agree. Could happen. I don't think it's very likely. And
Scorpion and the frog are more likely, is
the
what
thing
he's
about
saying.
being the good guys is we should keep trying to be the good guys. We shouldn't just give up.
But that's so easy to say.
See, unfortunately, too,
It's either that or bury the hatchet, go home and give up. I'm not going to do that.
Yeah, but we're the self-proclaimed good guys, the other guys. I remember a scene from The Longest Day where it was raining out, and there was an American general looking at the rain saying, sometimes I wonder whose side God is on, and a German general looking out at the rain saying, sometimes I wonder whose side God is on. Who are the bad guys and who are the good guys in all this? I doubt if Osama bin Laden considers himself a bad guy, nor do his 150 million followers. So.
Well, that's always been the issue. No bad guy ever looks in the mirror and says, I'm the bad guy in this. We all think we're the good guys.
But is that reason enough to not try to treat disease?
And that's the question.
No, it's not. And again, I made the distinction, what you do, fine, what Fleming did, the work you're doing. When we carry it beyond a point like 120 years, as I mentioned, and that's ultimately what I see cloning, or even therapeutic cloning, aiming toward. If we can save someone's life now, why not extend it beyond the 120 years? There's where we're
Well,
tampering
here's
with
what we
our
can't
own.
extend. We can't extend our time because we are out of time. I want to make sure I have enough time to say thank you, Dr. Larry Goldstein, for
pleasure.
being here. Thank you,
Anytime.
Bruno Leone, for
Thank
being
you.
here.
Thank you very
And
much.
by any time, I'd like to have you come back and continue this. We need hours, but we only had minutes. And I want to thank you all for listening as well. This is, of course, Opposing Viewpoints, live radio for TV. I'm Lynn Harper. Bye-bye.